Hi everybody. I just wanted to share with you this book, The Five Invitations, and just do a little review of it. It was written by Frank Ostesky, and it's discovering what death can teach us about living fully. And as I was reading it, I thought a lot about sobriety and about giving up alcohol and my alcohol trip and companions. And I just thought it'd be really good to share some of this because it can really relate to the sobriety journey. And so I just wanted to read some chapters and some bits from here which I thought would be good to share and may help you, and I hope they do. So the first invitation is, don't wait. It says, whatever we have done with our lives makes us what we are when we die, and everything, absolutely everything, counts. And I think about this with my drinking, and I've often said that I'm glad that I had problems with drink and that I drank so much, because it wouldn't have led me to where I am today. And it is what we've been through and our experiences that make us who we are. But also it's about not waiting to get what we want to get. And Frank writes that our lives are not solid and fixed. Knowing this intimately is how we prepare for death or for loss of any kind, and how we come to fully embrace constant change. We are not just our past, we are becoming. We can release grudges. We can forgive. We can free ourselves of resentment and regret before we die. Don't wait. Everything we need is right in front of us. Impermanence is the doorway to possibility. Embrace it is where true freedom lies. And I think that's really true. I used to be someone that was so fixed on where life was taking me. I had to know where it was taking me. And, now I actually embrace not knowing. It's actually quite joyful to actually live in the moment. But one of the big parts of that journey is learning to move on from the past and forgive ourselves. And with regards to forgiveness, Frank writes that forgiveness is critical for two reasons. It heals us by allowing us to set down old pain, and it helps us open up to love. In order to be free, we have to forgive. When I speak of freedom in this context, I don't mean some sort of ultimate enlightenment, but something far more practical and immediate. Freedom from indictments, recriminations and judgments that cause us so much suffering. Holding on to our pain is quite simply not in our best interests. The refusal to forgive is a way we resist life. We can be very loyal to our suffering, yet when we cling tightly to our past, we hold on to not just the memorials, but also the tension and the emotional states that go along with them. Resisting forgiveness is like grasping a hot coal and saying, I'm not going to let go until you apologise and pay for what you've done to me. In our effort to punish, we are the ones who get burned. Forgiveness allows us to let go of pain, not by sugarcoating it with positive thoughts, but by allowing our experience to come forward so that we can touch our pain with mercy. We don't have to let old hurts continue to define who we are in the here and now. We can let the past dissolve. We can leave it behind. We can say goodbye to old wounds. By forgiving, we can release ourselves from suffering that has been confining us ever since the event took place. In forgiving, we get to know our pain more intimately. And this is something that Polly and I spoke about yesterday, actually, on our podcast for Sobertown. That we drink. We, as humans, we don't like the pains and emotions, and we drunk or we've taken drugs to block those emotions. And once we start living in sobriety, we have to start living with our pain more intimately. And we actually learn to view even what we would previously have called negative feelings as quite positive. And forgiveness is a big part of that. And Frank continues with, forgiveness has the power to overcome what divides us. It can melt the armour of fear and resentment around our hearts that keeps us separate from others, from ourselves and from life itself. And yeah, again, I think that's true. We talk also a lot about it when we're drinking. It is a very solitary lifestyle, and it does separate us from others. And I like this this description that Frank goes on to write, that like the Ama Japanese women pearl divers of days gone by, when we dive deep in our wounds, we may emerge with treasure. Bare-breasted, the Ama wore nothing more than a short loincloth, a face mask and a pair of fins. They filled their lungs with air and plunged courageously into the cold, dark waters of the sea, disappearing below the surface and emerging several minutes later with a pearl. Exploring our own hurt, in addition to contributing to our healing, helps us feel empathy for others who have suffered similar injuries. And I think this is very true. We take the alcohol off. We are literally stripped bare, aren't we? We're stripped bare, and we're exposing all our emotions and all our feelings. But that in turn helps us to connect with others in this journey. And that's why, it's really good to get a sober community, because as much as we might want people in our lives to understand the journey we're going through, the people that know best are the people that have been through it. So that's why my community to me is really, really important. And Frank's second invitation is welcome everything, push away nothing. And his quote is, barns burnt down, now I can see the moon. And I'm just going to flip to the page. And what he says is that when we are open and receptive, we have options. We are free to discover, to investigate, and to learn how to respond skillfully to anything we encounter. We can't be free if we are rejecting any part of our lives. With welcoming comes an ability to meet and work with both pleasant and unpleasant circumstances. Gradually, with practice, we discover that our well-being is not solely dependent on what's happening in our external reality. It comes from within. In order to experience true freedom, we need to be able to welcome everything just as it is. At the deepest level, this invitation, like life itself, asks us to cultivate a kind of fearless receptivity. Welcome everything, push away nothing, cannot be done solely as an act of will. To welcome everything is an act of love. And then he describes a situation with his daughter Gina. And says, my daughter Gina and I like to go to shop in consignment stores for vintage clothing. There are great finds in such shops: a silk paisley scarf, a retro leather jacket, sequined heels. While Gina tries on outfits, I peruse the racks for the next cool item. Many of the clothes have a small stain, a missing button, or a slight tear in the fabric. I noticed in one store, all of the clothes carried a cardboard tag with the price and the disclaimer, as is. I like these tags. I think we should hang them around ourselves and each other like Christmas tree ornaments. What a beautiful gift to accept ourselves, others and our circumstances, as is, with all the beauty, imperfections and challenges that make up this very human life of ours. To welcome everything and push away nothing is an invitation to discover a deep dimension of our humanity, to tap into something beyond our habitual selves. We can gain access to some part of us that includes but is not driven by our reactivity. My habitual everyday self is not going to be able to welcome challenging emotions and experiences easily. Little old me can make some decisions, like whether I want chocolate or vanilla ice cream, but it wants to push away pain, anger, death, the big ticket items that require a more substantial investment from a larger part of myself. Why? My personality is always going to avoid the tough stuff. The personality is full of knowing and often has habitual interest in sustaining the familiar. We want what is happening to fit our agenda. The only thing our personalities have to work with is their own history. But if all we have to meet the current situation with is our habitual response, then we are bound to be getting the same results. We generally identify ourselves with the contents of our awareness, with our opinions, memories, desires, aversions, self-concepts, and other mental and emotional fixations. However, in welcoming everything, we allow our identities to rest in awareness itself. Awareness offers a completely different vantage point that doesn't need to push anything away. It isn't separate from anything else. It is, by definition, open, receptive, and responsive. When we engage that aspect of our being, an open and unbiased awareness allows us to see through the obstacles that are clouding our view. Awareness gives us the possibility to know and understand, and this means we have the possibility to find happiness and freedom. Welcome everything, push away nothing, is neither a foolish nor an idealistic invitation. On the contrary, it is eminently practical. Accepting life as it is means that we make peace with things as they are, rather than trying to force them to be the way that we want them to be, and then getting frustrated that we can't. Instead of spinning a story that we can then try to live into, we are open to the way things are and accept that we are completely human. To be human is much more than being born, getting an education, finding the right partner, and getting a pretty house or a nice street just so that you can sleep, wake, work, or go to bed, and to do it all again. It is an invitation to feel everything, to come into direct contact with strange, beautiful, horrible, and often perfectly ordinary things we call life. It is an opportunity to be conscious of the fact that some of us will make love, while others make war. And I actually think myself that I've been making war with myself for many years by drinking alcohol. I've not allowed myself to be human. I've drunk my humanness away, and now in sobriety, I'm beginning to find it again. So and then Frank goes on to say that when confronted by harsh realities in life, or even some small discomfort or inconvenience, our instinctive reaction is to run in the opposite direction. But we can't escape suffering. It will just take us by surprise and whack us on the back of the head. The wiser response is to move towards what hurts, to put our hands and attention gently and mercifully on what we might otherwise want to avoid. Especially in Western culture, we are taught that if suffering exists, something is wrong. And that's really true, isn't it? That we try and run, we do everything we can to run away from suffering. But suffering is actually okay. It is what it is. And I think the whole of this points towards one of the things that I try and look at is that from every breakdown there's a breakthrough, that things happen for a reason. And my real key is acceptance as what is. And sometimes that can be really tough, but it's about that control as well, that we can't control others. And if you just stand in that spot now where you are, just stand and just put your arms outstretched and circle them around you. That is the area that you have control of. Everything outside of that area is beyond your control. And when I forget that, I say the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Anyway, Frank continues with, when we believe that suffering is a mistake, it's no wonder we do everything in our power to steer clear of it. Our avoidance instinct is also due to the fact that our culture has decided that suffering has no value. Why suffer? We've been trained to say to ourselves, you're better off escaping this pain by any means possible. Oh, cue the alcohol advertisements there. He continues, as a result, we have become masters of distraction. To a great extent, this is our primary human practice. A large portion of our day is consumed with activities that are attempts to protect ourselves from discomfort. Surfing the internet, watching TV, working long hours, drinking, eating. Our approach naturally leads to epidemics in alcoholism and drug abuse, compulsive overeating, gambling and shopping, and an insecure attachment to our technological devices. We've become a society riddled with unhealthy addictions. Do any of these strategies really work? Sure, we get some temporary relief by ignoring problems or substituting a more pleasant experience for an unpleasant one. But when I look closely at my life, I see that such benefits are short-lived. What sticks around for the long run is the habit of self-deception and its negative consequences. Suffering is exacerbated by avoidance. The body carries with it any undigested pain. Our attempts at self-protection cause us to live in a small, dark, cramped corner of our lives. Oh gosh, and I'm just thinking about that. I think about Polly talking about her well, being stuck down in that well, in that cramped, dark space. And that's where many of us were actually when we decided to take the plunge and get sober. We were in a very cramped, dark, small space and wanting to give up on life. We couldn't see all the beauty that there was around us. Frank continues with, we accept a limited perspective of the situation and a restricted view of ourselves. We cling to what is familiar simply in order to reassert control, thinking we can fend off what we feel will be intolerable. When we push back, hoping to get rid of a difficult experience, we are actually encapsulating it. In short, what we resist persists. Yeah, and that's true, isn't it? As Craig Beck says, when we drink alcohol, all we do is press the pause button. The problems are all still there. Everything's still the same. We're just then dealing with the hangover as well. And some of you know that I actually did 72-hour phone silence the other week. And I don't suggest that anybody does this in early days of sobriety. You know, connection is key, and we do need to connect with one each other. And I wouldn't have put myself at risk. If I needed to reach out, I would have turned my phone back on again. But I realised that I was actually using my phone so much, as Frank says, to distract from my emotions, to distract from stuff. And I needed to connect with me and with the here and now. And it was really good to do for 72 hours. And I have restricted sort of some of my connections now from that, to actually live more in the here and now. And Frank's sort of third invitation is to bring your whole self to the experience. Okay. And I really like this. He says, imagine you had a photo of yourself printed on a thick, stiff cardboard. Now imagine that the photo was not just of your face or even the length of your body, but somehow represented a multi-dimensional image of your whole being, including all the parts of your personality. Suppose you fed that board through a laser cutting die to make it into a jigsaw puzzle. Visualise spreading all 1,000 interlocking pieces out on a table and starting to assemble the puzzle. You might begin with the corners or an easily recognisable part like your hand or your ear, or perhaps your eyes, since they are said to be the windows to your soul. But as you progressed, you might come upon a puzzle piece that you didn't like. For example, your fear. You might muse, I think I will leave this piece out. Or you might come upon your lust and say, no, my spiritual teacher told me that lust is no good. I can't include this piece. And so it would continue, with you deeming certain aspects of yourself acceptable and other parts totally unacceptable. After a while, you wouldn't be able to recognise yourself in the puzzle because you would be looking at such a fragmented image. You wouldn't be able to see the full picture. Wow, again, that's me in drink. I don't know about you, but yeah, truly me in drink. You can't see your whole self. You really just do see the fragmented part of you. The bit that the alcohol has destroyed your soul. It's completely soul destroying, and nothing makes sense anymore. You can't see the whole picture. There is no whole picture. You are shattered into that 1,000 pieces. And Frank says we all like to look good. We long to see as capable, strong, intelligent, sensitive, spiritual, or at least well-adjusted. We project a positive image. Few of us want to be known for our helplessness, fear, anger, or ignorance, or want others to know that sometimes we are more of a mess than we'd like to admit. And that again reminds me of my sober journey. When I first started and I found an app called the I Am Sober app, and there's a great community there. And my first posts were all so positive, really buoyant, really upbeat, really looking on the good of stuff. And I felt that I couldn't let people see the weaker side of me, or what I perceived to be the weaker side of me. But I've now learned that actually my strength is when I show my weakness, and that it is okay, and that helps other people to do the same, and it helps us to share, and it helps other people to help us too. Frank says that yet more than once I have found an undesirable aspect of myself, one about which I previously have felt ashamed and kept tucked away, to be the very quality that allowed me to meet another person suffering with compassion instead of a fear or pity. My own experience of abuse allowed me to empathise with both the abused and the abuser, to help each find forgiveness for their angst and their own towards their fear. It is not our experience, but rather the wisdom gained from our own suffering, vulnerability and healing that enables us all to feel real assistance to others. It is the exploration of our inner lives that facilitates us in forming an emphatic bridge from our experiences to theirs. To be whole, we need to include, accept and connect all parts of ourselves. We need acceptance of our conflicting qualities and the seeming incongruity of our inner and outer worlds. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means no part left out. And that's why sort of our sobriety journey can be so tough in the beginning, because we are not leaving anything out. We are exposing ourselves to us again and trying to piece all that back together. And one of the things that I did that has really helped me, well, somebody else had posted about a picture of a little girl saying, your inner child is still there, go find her, she's waiting patiently, go find her. And I found a picture of me when I was about 2, when I was innocent, childlike, had faith in everybody around me, before the world got to work on me, or until I let the world in. And you know what, I've put that picture of that little girl in that fridge, and I look at her every day, and her innocence and her happiness and her love and her belief and her trust. And me and her are now walking, or learning to walk hand in hand together again. We're learning to love each other again. And you know, for years I just drowned her out with alcohol. And you know what? She's a good girl. She's a loving girl. She's a kind girl. And together we are doing this. So go find your inner self. Go find the little you, the mini me, and start to walk hand in hand with that person again. Because they really are in there waiting for you to get this realisation. And then Frank writes a bit more on this third invitation about the inner critic. And yeah, you'll relate to a lot of this, I'm sure. No matter how you try, you can't please your inner critic. There is no fooling it. The critic knows your every move, every trick up your sleeve, every bit of your past. It has been right there with you throughout your life. You shower with it. You take it to work. It sits next to you at every meal, and even sticks around for dessert. It's there during and after sex, and yes, it's definitely there when you are dying. It compares, praises, devalues, diminishes, invalidates, blames, approves, condemns, and attacks your appearance, job performance, the way you conduct relationships, your friends, your health, your diet, your hopes and dreams, your thoughts, and your spiritual development. Pick something, anything, as it is all interchangeable. Let's face it, in the critic's eyes, nothing you do is good enough. The critic is the enforcer, demanding compliance to an acquired set of standards and moral codes. It's the voice that says, my way or the highway, and it wields out brutally its chosen weapons of fear, shame and guilt in order to get you to do what it wants. Often it is most vulnerable moments when we would benefit from tenderness that we club ourselves with self-judgment. Oh, and boy, do we do that. And you know what? Glennon Doyle's Untamed has come to my mind there, of like, you know, how we are all caged and how we're now climbing out of our cages and finding different ways. But it's really difficult because that inner critic that wasn't there when I was that little 2-year-old girl, well, even if it was, I wasn't aware of it, with life and being told what we should be doing, or what we ought to be doing, and how we should behave and act, etc., forms that inner critic in us. And Frank goes on to write that the inner critic is ambivalent about change, shifts in identity, creativity and inner work, and it's downright terrified of anything bubbling up from the unconscious. The judge prefers status quo, the familiar, the predictable. It insists on homeostasis. Don't rock the boat, it advises. It's not safe. That's why focusing on self-improvement or making any attempt to fix what the critic views as the problem never works. In seeking the approval of others, conforming to an external standard and trying to please, we are looking for love in all the wrong places. Praise and blame are symptoms of an infectious disease. And as with any illness, we need to do more than treat the symptoms. We have to address the underlying cause. We need to go to the heart of the matter. We need to see how the habit of constant self-judgment diminishes our life force, steals our inner peace, and crushes our souls. And you know what, that's so true. When Polly and I did our podcast yesterday, we looked at cognitive behavioural therapy, and we looked at the dry drunk as well, and we looked at a time where she'd stopped drinking for 10 months, but that's all she'd actually done was stop drinking. She'd stopped the behaviour, but she hadn't changed all the other stuff. She hadn't looked at the heart of the problem. She hadn't dealt with the thoughts and the feelings. And that's why it's so important in sobriety to do that. Just putting the drink down isn't enough. We really then have to get to work with our inner critic. Frank continues with, the pursuit of perfection is learned early on and for most of us becomes a lifelong addiction. It is an ego-based quest that easily can eclipse the soul's journey to wholeness. This is why, in order to bring our whole self to the experience, we must address the often unconscious, corrosive voice of the inner critic. It is the primary obstacle to self-acceptance, trust, and expansion of our dynamic potential. It stops all growth, arrests inner development, steals our power, and makes negative talk the norm. Furthermore, the judge impedes our ability to connect and empathise with other people. Chances are, if you're extremely critical of yourself, you'll be a harsh critic of others. You may think it, even if you don't say it. When we bring our whole self forward, we include our brokenness. We make room for blemishes as well as purity, strength as well as vulnerability, success as well as screw-ups. Judgment focuses on what's wrong. It feeds either-or mentality. Embracing wholeness is a loving act of reclamation, a both and way of meeting life. To free ourselves from the inner critic, we have to understand something of its origins, how we are impacted by it, and how we can successfully disengage from its negative influence. In short, our treatment plan includes the application of wisdom, strength, and love. When all of us were children, our parents and grandparents, older siblings, teachers, spiritual advisors and other responsible adults in our lives did their best to show us right from wrong. By and large, they were well intentioned. Their goal was to foster our development and protect us from harm. Without a doubt, we needed some guidance, or we wouldn't have made it into adulthood alive and healthy, nor would we have been able to successfully enter into a society that relies on certain codes of conduct. And so these grown-ups imbued us with their values and standards. They taught us the basic rules they believed we would need in order to cope in the world. This natural socialisation process only becomes problematic when it spills over into a forced attempt to align a child's behaviour with the adult's view of life. Most grown-ups are not ogres, yet inevitably they pass along their unconscious assumptions, unskillful strategies, prejudices and biases from their own unexamined lives. Maybe your parents were embarrassed by your fascination with your sexual impulses or exhausted by your unstoppable energy. Perhaps your teachers and spiritual leaders used warnings and reprimands to control your behaviour and manage your emotions and keep you from doing things that made them uncomfortable. Or maybe your mother or father wanted to get you to do things you didn't really want to do, like go to sleep when you weren't tired, dress a certain way, have different friends, or to eat what was offered, whether or not it looked and tasted good to you. When we were small, the adults had all the power. We were completely dependent upon them for our budding self-perception and, more importantly, for our survival. To a young child, such approval or disapproval often feels like a matter of life and death. Out of self-preservation, we learn to get and maintain approval and avoid shame and punishment by bending to adults' wishes. Along the way, we internalise their voices of authority, adapted to their values, or rebelled against them. This conditioning, the should and the should nots, the message that something was wrong with us, formed the basis of our inner critic. As we come into adulthood, the harsh, coercive voice of the judge outgrows its usefulness, but it continues to live on in us as a powerful psychological structure that wants to protect us by managing our lives. It's a bit like our wisdom teeth. Once we existed on a diet of raw meat, nuts and roots, these teeth were necessary for our survival. Yet as we evolved, we learned how to use tools, cutting and cooking the food we eat, and as a result we no longer needed our wisdom teeth. Similarly, as we mature, we have access to a less reactive and more discerning wisdom that is objective, positive, and can function as a reliable and creating guide in our lives. We don't need the critic's constant appraisal and attacks, its humiliation, repression and rejection, or the suffering it generates, but mostly we still think we do. And we drank for many years, didn't we, to completely block out that inner critic. And then when we grew up drinking, that critic has changed a bit, hasn't it? As that little voice that keeps trying to get you to drink, to block it out again, because that's the change in behaviour. And that's why it's so important that we, that we work on everything else. We don't just put down the drink, we work on everything else. And it's really hard. Drinking is a really solitary, isolating thing to do. And that's another thing that we have to change, is that critical voice of that we haven't got things to offer, of that we're not good enough, that we're not worth it, because we are. And together we are so much stronger. Together we can do so much more together. And so I'm going to go on to the next bit now, which is about hearing the cries of the world, which just tap in to this. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. And that was His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Frank writes that, and I want to share this because it's about connection really, and how we can work on our inner critics together. He says, I have several surfer friends who are always trying to teach me about waves. They talk to me about the elemental forces that create ocean waves thousands of miles offshore, how wind generates moving energy in the ocean. The wave swells become surf. They point to the effects of tides and currents, the shapes of the ocean floor, the length of a reef, wave height, the fetch and face of waves, and how they get arranged into sets. They spend endless hours studying waves. Honestly, I don't always see what they see. I do see that each wave is completely unique. No two waves are the same. They come into form dependent on many different conditions, live for a while, and express a distinctive beauty before they disappear, thrown up on the beach before flowing back out to sea. Each wave is distinct, yet not separate. All are part of the same ocean. The ocean is one big body, and the waves are its individual expression. We human beings are like that, exquisitely unique and differentiated, but not separate. With all of our extraordinary differences, we share the same basic nature. We are part of the same vast ocean. When we release ourselves from a narrow sense of separateness, we open to a wider world view, one that wisely appreciates that we are not alone, nor can we manage life alone. We recognise that we are tangled up with each other and completely interdependent with everything else, including the earth, sky and sea, the creatures that dwell in those places, and the seen and unforeseen forces that impact on our lives. A simple but effective meditation practice emphasises this truth and serves as a way of evoking the compassion that is hard-written in our nervous system. Try it when you meet somebody new. Silently repeat a few phrases to emphasise your common ground with the other person and feel the connection of simple human kindness. This person has a body, heart and mind, just like me. This person worries and gets frightened, just like me. This person is trying their best to navigate life, just like me. This person is a fellow human being, just like me. Now allow some benevolent wishes for well-being to arise. May this person have the strength and support to face the difficulties in life. May this person be free from suffering and its causes. May this person be peaceful and happy. And may this person be loved. Once we have seen ourselves in others and seen others in us, it fundamentally transforms the way we live in the world. The shift in perception brings about a change of heart. We can no longer fool ourselves into believing that the international disrespect of others, placing ourselves above or below others, or acting only in selfish ways will ever bring us real happiness. So the fourth invitation is find a place of rest in the middle of things. Rest is the conversation between what we love to do and how we love to be. And that's a quote by David White there. So I'm going to start by sharing a passage from Frank's book that says, in the Buddhist tradition, there is an image known as the wheel of samsara. Samsara means the cycle of death and rebirth to which the material world is inextricably bound. The wheel, as metaphor, illustrates the continuous cycle of conditions that cause us to spin round and round. The engine that drives the wheel is something referred to as the three poisons. These are the root causes of our suffering: craving, greed, aversion, hatred, and ignorance, delusion. At first, poison may seem like a strong word until we begin to recognise the toxicity of these afflictive states and the ways they contaminate our minds, obscuring our natural openness. Still, I prefer a more contemporary and visceral way of naming these universal obstacles, which Martin Earlwood, the resident Buddhist teacher at Moulin du Cherv's retreat centre in France, shared with me in a conversation. He called them demand, defence, and distract. Craving, the first poison, is a demand that the objects of our desire provide us with the lasting satisfactions that we feel fulfilled, whole and complete. It is the tendency to cling to someone, something, some idea, and become rigidly attached to it. Greed creates an inner hunger which has us always striving for an unobtainable goal: a new job, a new partner or child, a new car or home, a new body, a new attitude. We mistakenly believe our happiness is dependent upon reaching our goal, getting what we want. But the problem is that even if we do attain it, we find that we can get no lasting satisfaction from our accomplishments or possession, because everything in life is subject to the law of impermanence. Circumstances will change, or we'll become accustomed to the new role, or thing, or person in our lives, and our pleasure will inevitably, I got it there in the end, will fade. And that's so true, isn't it? Even with alcohol. Do you know what? At the end, even alcohol faded. We don't particularly want it. I remember drinking that last drink and not even actually wanting it, but drinking it because I just had to. I was addicted to it. But the pleasure of drinking, because there is some pleasure in drinking, let's be honest, initially, until it gets its hooks in you, and it will get its hooks into everyone. You know, a drunk is not your tramp under the bridge. It is everyday people like you and me. Anyway, Frank continues with, tragically inherent in demand is the notion that what is here now, what we have now, isn't good enough. We can sense this drive for more in our bodies as an energetic pull, the desperate wanting for something to fill up our underlying sense of deficiency. The second poison, the defense of aversion, can show up as anger, hatred, bullying, loneliness, intolerance or fear. We habitually resist, deny and avoid unpleasant feelings, circumstances and people, whatever we do not like or want. Defence traps us in a vicious cycle of finding conflicts and enemies everywhere. It reinforces our mistaken perceptions that we are separate from everything and everyone. Energetically, we know this drive in our bodies is the opposite of pull. It is a pushing away. The irony is that whatever we push away usually pushes back even harder. And yeah, it sure does, doesn't it? The more we drink to drown our sorrows, the more it pushes back at us, and it keeps going round and round, and it is a vicious cycle. The ignorance of distraction is the third poison. It blinds us to the way reality works, giving rise to the tendency to pull, the demand, and push, defend against life. We misperceive the nature of things, which is that they are both interdependent and impermanent. Instead, we get lost in a loop of distractions as a way of disconnecting from our pain. Alcohol, shopping, eating, gambling, sex, social media and video games, even meditation. All can serve as habits and strategies for distracting ourselves. All can go unquestioned. We lose ourselves, we get confused and hold unhelpful views. We go about our lives in a kind of fog, unable to see clearly that there is a way through our pain, which requires us to turn towards it. By trying to ignore it, we continually trip and fall further into our suffering. Energetically, we feel spaced out, dull, or vaguely unconscious. And I think we can all relate to that. You know, we can all relate to that, that's how we were feeling at the end of our drinking. And even if you're not feeling that now, you will get there eventually. That is how alcohol will make you be living your life in a fog, and you will not be able to see anything clearly. Generally speaking, we sense the presence of these conditions, but we prefer not to acknowledge just how strong a hold they have on us. They are the universal currents battling our minds about like tiny ships at sea. The antidote to all three poisons is mindfulness. Healing occurs through learning about these afflictive states of demand, defence and distraction, and realising that they impact all moments of all experiences. Suffering is not random, nor is it a punishment for our personal failings or a sign of moral weakness. Suffering is the natural consequence of ignoring the truth of life's ever-changing causes and conditions, and our natural inclinations to crave, avoid or distract ourselves won't go away by pretending they don't exist. On the contrary, they need to be seen and understood. When we realise how much pain they cause, we are less inclined to follow their commands. And mindfulness can be quite difficult, a meditation for people, and there's different ways of doing this. And, you know, it is a learned thing. Some people find it easy, but others don't. So I just wanted to talk through different ways of sort of doing mindfulness. And obviously there is the way to sit and be. And I really like this bit in the book. A physician named Candice had written to Frank after one of their week-long mindfulness meditation retreats. And I just found this quite comforting. And I thought by sharing it, hopefully it'll make you feel quite comforted too. And Candice wrote, "I used to view mindfulness as something to achieve. The degree to which I could focus on my breath equaled success. I would often critique the time I spent in meditation, such as, well, that session sucked. My mind wandered way too much. I got fidgety. I also found myself labelling almost everything that entered my mind during meditation as good or bad. I believed that keeping a scorecard would motivate me to be better at meditation, making my session more productive and efficient. I wondered if anyone else felt this way, but when I looked around the room, they all seemed so good at meditating. Sometimes I wondered why I had signed up for the course. I never liked practicing, but I wanted results, so I kept hanging in there. Then one day, some of your words got my attention. Mindfulness results in a non-judgmental way of being. This sentence was a catalyst for change in my world. The utter relief I felt at not having to spend so much energy judging everything, including myself, was freeing, wide and expansive. My whole body chilled out, my shoulders dropped, my neck stopped hurting, and I stopped cracking my elbow all the time. I began to develop true mindfulness, understanding that it begins and ends with a simple choice to pay attention to what is so, period. No scorecard, no grade, no labels, no pressure. Now when I'm being mindful, I feel open to things without assigning them to a value, pain, joy, sorrow, anxiety. Past, present and future all become the same. It can all be there, and that's okay. There is room for everything to exist. I am here to notice and learn, not to run away from my most challenging emotions or to crave one state over the other. In fact, when I do run away, crave or attach value, I suffer greatly because I want things to be different than they are. The practice of mindfulness, as I now know, it continues to be pretty difficult at times. But more and more often, when I'm sitting in silence, I know I am there. Literally, I know I am there. I sense my body. This is so important. I really feel my feet on the floor, the air moving in and out of my nostrils, the little goings on internally like my pulse, my growling stomach, my aching back. Slowly over the course of the week, I felt grief surfacing. Grief for all the years I'd spent living in my head, judging, critiquing and analysing. There are still times when I meditate that I cry about this, but I can breathe through it, and later the tightness is gone. Mindfulness is, and always will be, about getting back to my breath. It feels like a very safe place to land, a home, a loving embrace. I no longer feel compelled to grade myself on performance. I've learned that mindfulness is not about achieving some perfect state or being the best at something. It's about being the most authentic, imperfect, vulnerable and, well, human. And that last bit especially, I think, when we go into sobriety, that's one of the things that really helps us to connect and understand and get through this, is the understanding that it's about being authentic, it's about being imperfect, it is about being vulnerable, and it is really about being human. Being liberated is this human experience means including the personal, psychological and emotional aspects of life, and also going beyond the personality towards a fuller awakening. We have to be willing to meet our suffering, to uncover the hidden shadows, to acknowledge our neurotic patterns, to heal childhood wounds and to embrace what we have rejected. I've needed to balance spiritual practice with good psychotherapy, somatic work, grief counselling and other methods of inquiry. Those wise therapeutic relationships have been invaluable in helping me to integrate what I first discovered in silence. And I think that's really important. We talk a lot in sobriety about connection, and connection being the opposite of addiction. And it's about finding what's right for you. Some people go to AA. I am part of the I Am Sober app, and the community there is amazing. I'm also part of the Sobertown podcast, where you can find wonderful tools and blogs and sobriety stories, and you can find myself and Polly doing our happy hour, 2 for the price of 1, usually on a Sunday as well, and that's at www.sobertownpodcast.com. And the I Am Sober app is free, you can download that, but obviously there are lots of others out there as well. They're just ones that I belong to. So it's about finding your community, what's right for you. The same as therapeutic work as well. It's about, there's lots of different types of therapy out there, so look into that. There's cognitive behavioural therapy, there's ACT therapy, there's brief solution focused, there's compassionate therapy, there's psychodynamic psychotherapy. It's about finding what's right for you, really. So yeah, there's dialectical behavioural therapy, which is very much when mindfulness came into the Western world. I think mindfulness and meditation has been part of the Eastern world and Buddhism for thousands of years. But DBT saw the resurging of mindfulness about getting in touch with our feelings and our emotions. So yeah, get out there, listen. There's stuff on YouTube, listen to podcasts and read. My favourite books are Annie Grace and This Naked Mind. She also does a free 30 days experiment on alcohol. So you don't have to say you're giving up alcohol. You're stopping for 30 days and you do the experiment with her. And at the end of that, you make up your mind what you want to do. There's also The Unexpected Joys of Being Sober by Catherine Gray. It's another great book. And as already mentioned, Craig Beck, Alcohol Lied to Me. And of course now I'm on the 5 invitations. Not specifically for sobriety, but I'm finding it really useful and I hope you will too. Anyway, the other way to use mindfulness, if you can't just sit with mindfulness, is to actually just to sit with nature. Take it in, watch the birds, feel the sunshine, feel the breeze, you know. Go for walks, just take things in that we forget to notice. You know, a great way to look at mindfulness and to learn to be mindful is to look at kids and how kids get joy in a blade of grass, a bit of sand, a bit of water. You know, just watch them, because along the way we forget to do all that. But we're born with it. We're born with mindfulness, but we forget it because life gets in the way. And Frank goes on to say that everything we do can be used in the cultivation of mindfulness, from driving to work to eating, raising our children, being with our beloveds. We can roll it all into what we call our spiritual practice and seamlessly integrate it into every aspect of our everyday lives. Waking to a new day is a holy moment. Doorways offer themselves as thresholds to new possibilities. Trees are utterly themselves. All things are a potential source of support and awakening. When we attempt to separate the sacred from the ordinary, we create a false dichotomy. So yeah, we can use mindfulness all the time. It's about being in touch, isn't it, with ourselves. It's about, as Candice says, being authentic, imperfect, vulnerable and human. And we can find that, you know, in everyday beings, activities. I remember once, I'm sure we've all done this. Do you remember like hand dryers before Dyson? It's a really bad hand dryers and you could never dry your hands. You ended up 9 times out of 10 walking out the public toilet, wiping your hands on your jeans or your dress or skirt or whatever to get them dry. And I went into, and then Dysons came along and they made us be able to do things a lot quicker because they dry our hands a lot more effectively. And a year or so ago before lockdown, I went into a public toilet and I washed my hands, and it was an old-fashioned thing. And I was like, oh, getting really impatient with the hand dryer and wanted to walk out, wipe my hands on my jeans and walk out. And I caught myself and I thought, what's the rush? Just stand here, just dry your hands, take a moment. And you know, it was wonderful because I just took a moment. I felt the air blowing on my hands. I felt myself rubbing my hands, and I just actually got lost in that moment and actually took a breath. And, you know, because that's another thing, isn't it? How many times do you find yourself holding your breath? I mean, it's that bad that on my watch, I've just looked at, it tells me that it's time to stand up. It would tell me that I need to breathe and do breathing exercises with me too, because that's how lost in life we've got. And that's why it's so important just to come back to the breath. And just a quick tip actually here, for anybody who suffers with anxiety or panic attacks, and if you get to that point of hyperventilation where you can't breathe properly or you feel you can't breathe, just do a breath out. Just push that breath out, just go because you will automatically just breathe back in again. Okay, that's a little tip for hyperventilating. Yeah. And continuing about the breath, just lastly on this bit, Frank says that yes, there is a space between each breath, each thought, but it actually connects them. It's a bit like experiments in perception that use the picture of the old woman who, if we look carefully, we can also see as a young woman. Heart and mind, ordinary and sacred, are all in fact a unified whole. When the mind is attentive, focused, we notice the space. Here is where we discover a place of rest. Claude Debussy is credited with saying, "Music is the space between the notes." The white space on this page allows your eyes to rest on the words. In art, negative space is just as important as the image itself, helping to bring balance to a composition. No matter how much activity, no matter how much form exists in our lives, there are pauses and spaces everywhere, inviting us to rest. He then goes on to talk about a courageous presence. And he puts a quote from Audre Lorde. "I realise that if I wait until I'm no longer afraid to act, write, speak, be, I'll be sending messages on a Ouija board, cryptic complaints from the other side." When fear speaks, courage is the heart's answer. I like that. Just like that little quote. So the willingness to sit with fear is an act of courage. Fear is both a psychological construct and an irrefutable biological function of stimulus response involving the release of adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream, increased heart rate, tightening of certain muscles, the formation of goosebumps, and the dilation of the pupils. Fear is a normal human reaction, sometimes a necessary survival response to a perceived threat which generates a specific pattern of behaviour. We speak about rational and irrational fears, but all fear is subjective. What makes me only nervous, such as the possibility of a huge earthquake hitting California, can generate full-blown panic in another person. What makes you cringe in terror like a spider might not cause me any apprehension at all. Fear can arise from an accurate perception of a situation or from a completely distorted view. The fear of the saber-toothed tiger is real, or at least it was when saber-toothed tigers roamed the earth. Now the fear is a story, an old story that lives inside our imaginations. Still, we can scare ourselves with the thought that we always are being hunted, or that we must hide away after dark to stay safe. We can even get anxious about the possible return of actual saber-toothed tigers in the future. Fear doesn't require basis in reality in order to have an impact on us. No matter what its cause, the fear still feels real. That said, it's best not to treat fear as the absolute truth. Living from a place of fear can narrow our vision, shrinking our lives down to what is comfortable and familiar. We easily become consumed with safety, precautions, and dread the uncertainty, constantly looking over our shoulders. It is reasonable to want to protect ourselves and those we love, but being driven by fear alone, we stop using our common sense and make unwise decisions. We grow less willing to take risks and face conflict or disapproval, and may even slip into compliance to gain the security promised by authorities. For some, fear manifests in counter-phobic tendencies. We engage in dangerous high-risk activities, continually testing our own limits or others' loyalty. We become aggressive, even bullying, to mask our fear or deny its impact on our lives. When we place all of our emphasis on overcoming fear, there is no rest. Either way, compliance or rebellion, in the end, unaddressed, fear is a self-imposed exile, a prison of our own making. There will always be things that frighten us. It's foolish to imagine otherwise. I have a lot of fear. My fear shows up as second-guessing, my self-procrastination, difficulty trusting, and looking for reassurance from others. The goal is not to one day get rid of fear at all. It is rather to free ourselves from the fear's chokehold around our lives, to learn to face our fear with courageous presence. And that for me is very true. One of the things that led me to drinking was the fear of never fitting in. But also it got a lot worse when my son was born, because he was so wanted and I loved him so much, and I had a fear of him dying. And actually I'd even had this convinced in my head that he was going to die when he was 2. And just reflecting on this now, this is when my drinking got really bad for the last 22 years. And I had a real fear, and I could not cope with the fear of losing him. So what I stupidly did was I drank every day for 22 years and actually wasn't present for him. Yeah, that's quite a sobering thought. Okay. So a separation needs to occur. But not the one we might have imagined. In coping with fear, it is helpful to distinguish our emotional state from the object of which we are afraid. When we obsess about the objects we fear, insects, identity theft, rejection, terrorism, speaking in public, we avoid contact with the emotion itself. When we discern the difference between the emotion and the object, we can see the part we play in the process. Then we can begin to unhook ourselves from the overwhelm. We relax and temporarily hold the fear in the container of the body, supported by steady breathing, so that we can examine the mind's operations, the beliefs, assumptions, memories and stories that underpin the fear. In this way, we can begin to reduce our reactivity. And that's what we're doing in sobriety, isn't it? It's just actually unpinning and unpicking all that stuff that's underneath and the reason why we drank in the first place. And guess what? Craig Beck was right. We did just press balls. It's all still there. And alcohol made it a whole lot worse. Can we befriend the fear? Can we meet it with mindfulness? Touch the suffering it causes with a deep compassion and cultivate the loving equanimity that will allow us to stay with it? If so, then we can find a place of rest even with fear. Ram Dass once said, after many years of undergoing psychoanalysis, teaching psychology, working as a psychotherapist, taking drugs, being in India, being a yogi, having a guru, and meditating for decades, as far as I can see, I haven't gotten rid of one neurosis. Not one. The only thing that changed is that they don't define me anymore. There is less energy invested in my personality, so it's easier to change. My neuroses are not huge monsters anymore. Now they are little shmoos that I invite over to tea. And you know what? Me doing these podcasts is me really facing my fear. I struggle with my words a lot sometimes. I struggle with perceptions and reading, which is from physical illnesses and conditions. But I also think I drunk away a lot of my neurons and my nervous connections, and I'm striving on getting those back. So I'm opening up to my vulnerability. I'm not re-recording when I've made mistakes. You would have heard me saying sorry a few times and repeating words, and I've probably mispronounced words, but I'm okay with that. It's okay. The fifth invitation is cultivate the don't know mind. A mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work if it's not open. I absolutely love that. That's Thomas Robert Dewar, and repeated by Frank Zappa. And that's how Frank, in this book, opens the fifth invitation of cultivate the don't know mind. As we go about our day-to-day lives, we rely on our knowledge. We have confidence in our ability to think through problems, to figure things out. We are educated. We have training in specific subjects that permits us to do jobs well. We accumulate information through experience, learning as we go. All this is helpful and necessary in moving through our lives smoothly. Ignorance is usually thought of as the absence of information, being unaware. Sadly, it is more than just not knowing. It means that we know something, but it is the wrong thing. Ignorance is misperception. Don't know mind represents something else entirely. It is beyond knowing and not knowing. It is off the charts of our conventional ideas about knowledge and ignorance. It is the beginner's mind, Zen Master Suzuki Roshi spoke of when he famously said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. Don't know mind is not limited by agendas, roles and expectations. It is free to discover. When we are filled with knowing, when our minds are made up, it narrows our vision, obscures our ability to see the whole picture and limits our capacity to act. We only see what our knowing allows us to see. The wise person is both compassionate and humble and knows that she does not know. Don't know mind is an invitation to enter life with fresh eyes, to empty our minds and open our hearts. Yeah, and as Glennon Doyle would say, here I am. So coming back to fear again, he talks about the fear of losing our memories is a common one. I find it useful and even reassuring to recognise that actually we have been losing our memories all along. Our brains are not computer hard drives. Human memory is not a simple matter of accurate data in, accurate data out. It is a far more complicated, subtle and beautiful process. Forgetfulness is actually built into the system. Memory has a use it or lose it quality. Brain scientists speak of memory transience, the way the brain gets rid of unused memories to make room for new ones. Often people with severe amnesia cannot form short-term memories, forgetting information almost immediately, but we are all cleaning out the closets of our brain on a regular basis. This means that memory is not objective, truthful, exact, or by any means permanent. Our memories are malleable constructs. Okay. And on the podcast, on the blogs, Todd in Sobertown, Todd talks about the plasticity of the brain as well, and that's a really, really interesting blog. So have a little look at that. Once we realise that we don't recall our memories with any reliable accuracy, when we can free ourselves to tell the stories we need to tell, sharing our stories is not about nailing down the facts of an event or the exact recall of circumstances. Rather, the point of stories is to take the separated, isolated, broken pieces of our lives and in telling them produce moments of wholeness. When we share our stories, we relax our need to interpret life's events in a particular way. We open ourselves to don't know mind and allow a deeper part of ourselves to come forward and speak. In a way, what emerges is our soul's stories. We cannot change an originating event that may have caused us pain, but we can absolutely change our reaction to what happened. We realise that when we dwell on and retell a story, this unquestioned recirculating of memories can lodge old suffering even more deeply in our minds, causing the present to be defined by our past. When we observe our present reactions and with compassion, we are able to release ourselves from the grip of old wounds. We can impact how we think about events now by looking at our interpretations, shifting our perceptions and discovering new meanings. We can become aware of the memories that were holding us back, and then we can let go. Telling our stories allows us to pull back and see the big picture. We remember things differently and become more aware of certain details, the ones that we might not have noticed before. Often buried in an old story is the strength we need to accept our current situation. Healing requires more than just a change in storyline, but telling of the story can start a process. When we tell our stories, we heal. When someone listens to our stories, we heal. And that's some of the things that, one thing that the Sobertown podcast has done. It's given a platform for people to go and to tell their stories. So, you know, it's a really good thing to do. And it is very true what it says here. And it says stories are a way we find meaning, but rarely a single meaning. Usually there are layers of meaning. Maybe things are this way, but maybe they are not. This is where don't know can help us understand ourselves and each other better. When we are not so fixed in our views, stories can take us on a journey past plotliness, or even facts to reveal a truth that we may have missed when we were only looking with our ordinary minds. Most real-life stories don't have clear beginnings and end, but they do help us make sense of life and embrace its mystery. Through stories, we knit ourselves together as a family, a community and a culture, joining ourselves with the larger human story. And again, you know, when we tell our stories on podcasts and here, you know, even just doing this, we're sharing to try and make a difference to other people's end, to life, to connect. It helps us to tell our stories. It helps other people to listen, and it helps us all to connect. And it gives us a sense of where we are, where we're heading maybe. When we don't know where we're going, we have to remain fully present, carefully feeling our way inch by inch, moment by moment. We have to stay close to our actual experiences. When we don't know, anything is possible because we are not limited by old habits of thinking or others' points of view. We see the bigger picture. Not knowing leaves room for wisdom to arise, for the situation itself to inform us. And that's something many of us get to. I got to about 3 months of like, who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? And I used to be someone who had to know where I was going in life and where it was taking me and what was happening. And now I absolutely love not knowing. I love the adventure of life day by day. So yeah, who will I be without my familiar story of self? It's no wonder we are afraid of letting go. We don't know anything else, but this is all powerful me. We cling to the known and we fear entering into the unknown. Watch children in the playground swinging from the monkey bars. They move freely, letting go of one rung and reaching for the next in a fluid motion. Have you ever noticed adults on the same structure? Rarely happens. But when it does, you'll see that they maintain a tight grip on one bar and won't let go until they have a good hold on the next. Oh my goodness, another lesson from children here. They have so much to teach us, they really do. We are in a fight against nature. Reality cannot be mapped. It is beyond description of any one view. It is not a single static truth, but rather an endless unfolding mystery. It is alive, dynamic, and constantly being expressed through form and formlessness. The Heart Sutra, in one of Buddhism's most renowned, beautiful and confounding teachings, its most central lines read, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness itself is form. Emptiness is no other than form. Form is no other than emptiness." The words are almost incomprehensible upon first reading. But if we stick with it, we can see that the sutra describes the nature of our minds and of reality quite accurately. Just as we cannot pull life and death apart, neither can we separate form and emptiness. They are a package deal, always arising together. Emptiness is a difficult word for most Westerners. We normally associate empty with deficiency, sterility, a void. Most of us relate more easily to the words openness, spaciousness, or better still, boundlessness. I like to think of emptiness as an open expanse, a field with no edges, that is not limited by any concepts. Think of how, upon walking into a large room, we first notice the objects in it, the tables, the chairs, sofa, artwork, and lamps. But with a bit more attention, we might observe how the light is shifting from moment to moment. We become aware of the space that surrounds and holds the objects as they abide in. Similarly, when we look at our minds, first we see the object in it, our thoughts, feelings, memories, daydreams, plans, as well as the sensations coming to us from our bodies, our perceptions of the event that are happening to us. A little bit more reflection reveals that we are cognizant of these activities in our minds because they are occurring in the open space of awareness. This awareness is always there. We just don't normally pay attention to it because we're preoccupied with the objects, our perceptions and emotions. Just as when we walk into the furnished room, our attention went to the tables and chairs, not the empty space. So we could say that the open space of our boundless awareness, which contains the form or our thoughts and perceptions, is empty. The funny thing is, we actually think of form as permanent. They are what we turn to in search for security. Yet upon closer examination, we discover that even the forms themselves are empty, impermanent. Our ideas, fantasies and physical sensations, we may think of these as solid things, but they are more like bubbles. They appear for a while, then they dissolve. They come, they go, just like us, just like everything in the universe. We exist and then we don't. Each life, each occurrence, each feeling, every love-making, every breakfast, every atom, every planet, every solar system is fleeting. Every form takes its turn on the wheel of living and dying. Emptiness, on the other hand, is never-ending. Emptiness, in fact, gives birth to form. Emptiness makes everything possible. And, we are very much people that have to be doing and we don't very often live in that emptiness. So I, for one, am going to start looking more and observing more about that emptiness, because I think I will learn a lot more in that. And you know what, when I just a thought there, when I gave up drinking, and a lot of us are, the fear is, how can I never drink again? What am I going to do with all that time? My life is going to be so empty. Do you know what? My life has never been so full, but it is more full of emptiness, of space and time now. And somebody shared on our ladies group earlier today a film from TikTok, and it's this guy, and you're saying it's Wednesday, and you know, Wednesday I think is hump day in the States, and because it's the middle of the week, it's neither here nor there, is it? And he was saying that, you know, on your gravestone there's the date that you're born and there's the date that you die, and in between those two dates is a line, and that line is your life, and you need to make that line as full as possible. And I'm just going to finish now just with one last thing from Frank's book. It says, the beloved Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh uses a simple exercise to illustrate the point of us not being alone, of us all being connected and being together. He holds up a blank sheet of white paper and asks the audience to name what they see. Most respond, white paper. Children and poets answer more creatively. They say clouds, rain and trees. Because, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, without clouds there will be no rain. Without rain, trees cannot grow, and without trees we cannot make paper. And if we continue to look, we can see the logger who cut the tree and brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. And we see the wheat. We know that the logger cannot exist without his daily bread, and therefore the wheat that became his bread is also in this sheet of paper. And the logger's father and mother are in it too. When we look in this way, we can see that without all of these things, the sheet of paper cannot exist. Looking even more deeply, we can see that we are in it too. This is a way of expressing our deep belonging and interdependence with everybody and everything. This is a way of understanding that the sacred is not something apart from us. It is here with us in every moment. I hope you enjoyed me reading some snippets from Frank Ostashevsky's 5 Invitations. I thoroughly recommend it. If it's spoken to you today, it's spoken to me. Even if you're not recovering from alcohol, because that's not the full intention, I don't think, with which it was written. It's written with about learning to live our lives in the here and now, and making that dash between our dates of birth and death a good one. Have a good life. Take care.